The judge's gavel hit wood, and I felt it in my ribs. Jefferson County Probate Court is now in session, she said, then looked straight at me. We're here on a petition for conservatorship over Riley Montgomery. Conservatorship, a clean word for a filthy thing, a legal cage dressed up as protection. Across the aisle, my parents sat like they belonged there. My father, Clark Montgomery, wore the same crisp blue shirt he'd saved for church and job interviews, spine locked, jaw set. My mother, Karen, clutched a tissue like a pop, eyes already pink, lips trembling on cue. Beside them stood their attorney, Harris Caldwell, slick suit, calm smile, the kind that said he'd won before the first sentence. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and spoke like he was reading a bedtime story. Your Honor, we're deeply concerned about Riley's ability to manage her finances and personal well-being. She's isolating. She's making irrational decisions. She's become unrecognizable. Her parents only want to keep her safe. Safe. That word landed like a thumb pressing down on my throat. I looked at the paperwork in my lap. Petition for conservatorship. Underneath, a list of accusations dressed as facts. Unstable behavior, paranoia, refusal of help, inability to hold stable employment. Employment. I worked in medical records at a hospital. Not glamorous, no corner office, no big title that made people sit up straighter. I filed, verified, protected private information for a living. I was invisible by design. People glanced at me and forgot me. My father used that invisibility like a weapon. She can't take care of herself, he announced, voice booming for the whole room. She doesn't understand money. She's secretive. She won't listen. She's going to ruin her life. My mother dabbed at dry eyes. We've tried everything, she whispered, turning her face slightly so the courtroom could see her suffering. We just want our daughter back. I didn't flinch. I'd seen this performance my entire life. The audience changed. The script never did. The judge, Judith Holland, silver hair pulled tight, eyes sharp, studied me for a moment. Miss Montgomery, she said, do you have legal counsel today? I didn't, not yet. No, Your Honor, I answered. Caldwell's smile widened, almost polite, like he'd just been handed the winning card. He slid a folder onto the table. We also have documentation from a counselor indicating Miss Montgomery displays signs consistent with impaired judgment, and a series of messages that show hostility and refusal to cooperate. My stomach stayed still, but my skin went hot. They were doing it, using the language of care to force control, painting me as a risk so they could claim the right to manage my body, my money, my life. The judge flipped through the petition. This request includes access to bank accounts, lease agreements, medical records, and authority over residence and major decisions, she said. Residence, meaning they could decide where I lived, who I saw, what I did, whether I could even touch my own paycheck. I stood, slow and steady. Your Honor, I said, I object to this petition. I'm competent, I'm employed, I pay my bills. I'm not a danger to myself or anyone else, and I do not consent to my parents controlling my finances or my person. Caldwell tilted his head, as if I'd just proven his point by speaking at all. My father leaned forward, confident. She's lying, he said, loud enough to make sure everyone heard. She thinks she's smarter than everybody. She refuses help. She's impulsive. Impulsive. A memory flashed. Me, at 16, standing at our kitchen counter while my father pushed a stack of papers toward me. Sign, he'd said. It's just family paperwork. Don't make it complicated. I'd signed because I was a kid who still believed love came with conditions. Now, 10 years later, I understood exactly what those conditions were. The judge tapped her pen once, thinking. I will appoint a court investigator to assess Miss Montgomery's capacity and best interests, she said. In the interim, I'm issuing temporary restrictions on major financial decisions until we hold a full hearing. Temporary restrictions. Not a full cage yet, but a leash clipped to my collar. Caldwell nodded like a man collecting a paycheck. My mother bowed her head, trembling. My father exhaled, satisfied, like the world had returned to its proper order. As people stood to leave, my father paused near me, just long enough to make sure his words cut. You have no idea how the world works, he murmured. I met his eyes, calm, quiet. Oh, I said, I do. In the back row, my younger brother Jake sat hunched, hands clasped tight. 24, tired eyes, a bruise fading along his wrists like a fingerprint. He wouldn't look at me for long, like he was afraid that if he did, my father would feel it. I walked out into the hallway, the air colder than the courtroom. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My phone felt heavy in my palm as I scrolled to a name I'd saved months ago and hoped I'd never need. Morgan Hewitt, forensic CPA. I hit call. She answered on the second ring. Hewitt. I said, my parents filed for conservatorship and I think they've been using my identity to open accounts. A pause. Then her voice sharpened. Do you have your credit report? I glanced at my bag, where a tiny memory card sat tucked into a side pocket like a bullet. I do, I said, and I have more than that. Good, Morgan replied. Don't warn them, don't confront them, send everything to me tonight. I was still holding the phone when it buzzed again, another notification sliding across the screen. A text from Jake. 4 words that turned my blood to ice. Riley, they know. I stared at Jake's text until the words stopped looking like letters and started looking like a threat. Riley, they know. The courthouse hallway suddenly felt too narrow, too bright, like the building itself was watching me. I walked past the vending machines and the peeling bulletin board, pushed through the double doors, and stepped into the winter air. My hands were steady, but my chest was tight. I typed back one line. Where are you? His reply came fast. Parking lot, by the blue Civic. I didn't run. Running makes people notice you, and my whole life I'd learned how to move through the world without drawing eyes. I kept my face blank, my steps even, like nothing had changed. Outside, my parents were already across the lot, climbing into my father's truck. Caldwell shook my dad's hand like they'd just closed a deal. My mother's head dipped in that fragile, defeated way she used when she wanted strangers to think she'd tried her best. Then my father turned just for a second and looked directly at me. He didn't wave, he didn't smirk. He simply watched. The look wasn't victory, it was calculation. I reached Jake's car. He was hunched over the steering wheel, knuckles pale, eyes red, like he hadn't slept. When he saw me, he flinched, like I was the one who might explode. What do you mean they know? I asked, voice low. Jake swallowed. I heard them talking last night. Dad was on the phone with Caldwell. He said something about you moving money and hiding assets. He said if the judge thinks you're hiding something, it helps their case. I stared at him. Did you tell them anything? No. Jake shook his head too hard. I swear, I didn't say a word, but... He dragged a hand down his face. Mom went through my room. She found the old phone I used when I was helping you pull the credit reports. She didn't know what it was, but she took it. My skin went cold. That phone had screenshots, account numbers, a timeline. Not everything, but enough to point them in the right direction. Enough for them to start covering tracks. Jake, I said, slow, do you remember why you were helping me pull credit reports in the first place? His mouth opened, then shut. His eyes dropped to the dashboard like the truth was written there. "Because it wasn't just you," he whispered. The words hit harder than the gavel had. "What?" I said. Jake's voice broke. "They did it to me too. Not as much. But they opened a card in my name when I was 19. Said it was for emergencies. Then it got maxed out. When I asked, Dad said I was ungrateful and threatened to kick me out. My heartbeat stayed steady, but something inside me cracked open and went sharp. This wasn't about love or concern or family. This was a system, a pipeline, and I was the biggest account they'd ever touched. I leaned back against the car door, staring at my parents' truck as it rolled toward the exit. My father's shoulders looked relaxed, like he'd already decided how this story ended. I pulled my phone out again and opened my bank app. The loading circles spun. Then my balance appeared. Normal. No missing money, no sudden transfers. Which meant something worse. They weren't stealing from me today. They were setting the stage to steal everything tomorrow. If they got conservatorship, they wouldn't need to sneak. They could drain me with a judge's blessing. They could sell property, cancel leases, move me into some facility and call it care. "Listen to me," I said to Jake. "You're going to do exactly what I tell you. You're going to go home, act normal, and you're going to stop reacting to them. You hear me?" Jake's eyes widened. "Riley." "Act," I repeated, "because if they think you're scared, they'll squeeze harder." Jake nodded, shaky. "Okay." I opened my contacts and hit Morgan Hewitt again. She answered like she'd been waiting. "Talk to me." "They found evidence, at least some of it, and it's bigger than we thought. They've been using Jake, too." Morgan was quiet for a beat. Then, "All right, here's what we do. We move fast and we move clean. You're going to pull a full Tri-Bureau credit report tonight. You're going to freeze your credit with all 3 agencies, and you're going to request your check systems report. If they opened bank accounts, it'll show." I swallowed. "And the court?" She said, "We build a record, not a feeling, not a story, a record. Documents, dates, signatures. And Riley, do not confront them. Predators don't confess. They relocate." The word predators made me glance at my brother's bruised wrist again. A fading mark. A quiet warning. My phone buzzed. A new notification from an unknown number. No name, just a message. "Stop digging, or you'll lose Jake." My vision tunneled for half a second. Jake saw my face. "What? What is it?" I turned the screen toward him. He went gray. "That's Dad. He uses those burner apps. He does that when he's mad." I looked at the message again. Not a bluff, a confession. I exhaled once, slow, and felt something settle inside me, heavy, calm, unmistakable. They weren't trying to protect me, they were trying to own me, and now they'd put my brother on the table as leverage. I slid the phone back into my coat pocket and met Jake's terrified eyes. "Okay," I said softly, "now we stop playing defense." Jake's breath hitched. "What are you going to do?" I watched my parents' truck disappear onto the main road, tailgate shining under the pale sun. My father's shoulders looked relaxed, like he'd already decided how this story ended. I pulled my phone out again and opened my bank app. The loading circle spun. Then my balance appeared. Normal. No missing money, no sudden transfers. Which meant something worse. They weren't stealing from me today. They were setting the stage to steal everything tomorrow. If they got conservatorship, they wouldn't need to sneak. They could drain me with a judge's blessing. They could sell property, cancel leases, move me into some facility and call it care. By midnight, my kitchen table looked like a crime scene made of paper. Credit reports printed from all 3 bureaus. Check systems pages. Old bank statements. Screenshots from Jake's burner phone folder. I laid everything out in rows, like the hospital charts I handled every day, only this time, the patient was my own life. Morgan Hewitt joined on a video call, her face lit by a desk lamp, hair pulled back tight. She didn't waste words. "Freeze your credit," she said first. "All 3, tonight." "Already done," I replied. "Good. Next, fraud alerts. Then we pull every inquiry and every account opened in the last 5 years. We're looking for patterns, dates, addresses, any phone numbers you don't recognize." I slid 1 page toward the camera. "There's an address in Gardendale I've never lived at." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "That's a mailbox rental place. They use those to keep statements out of your hands." I didn't feel surprised. I felt sick, like discovering someone had been living in your house while you slept. Jake sat on the other side of the table, elbows on his knees, bouncing his heel. He looked smaller than he should have, like fear had shaved years off him. Every time his phone buzzed, he flinched. "Your father's message," Morgan said. "The threat about Jake. Screenshot it, back it up, email it to me." "I already did," I said, and watched her nod, approving. That tiny nod did more for me than any comfort ever could. It wasn't sympathy, it was strategy. I clicked open a folder on my laptop labeled Work. Inside were dozens of spreadsheets and PDFs. I'd always been careful. Quiet people learn to build backups. I pulled up a file called Timeline. Morgan leaned forward. "What's that?" "A list. Every time my parents asked me to sign something, every time Dad helped me with paperwork, every time I got mail that felt off. I started writing it down years ago." Jake blinked. "You never told me that." "I didn't tell anyone," I said. "I wasn't sure I needed it. I just didn't like how it felt." Morgan's mouth tightened. "Instinct. The most expensive thing predators try to steal is your instinct." We worked for hours. I highlighted odd accounts in yellow, unknown addresses in red. There were 2 credit cards I'd never opened, a personal loan inquiry from a lender I'd never heard of, and something that made Morgan go very still. A small business line of credit, opened under a name that looked like mine, but wasn't. R. Montgomery Consulting, LLC. I stared at the page. "That's not me." "No," Morgan said quietly. "That's them using you as a front." Jake's face drained. "Dad doesn't even know what an LLC is." Morgan gave him a hard look. "You'd be surprised what people learn when they're desperate." Desperate. That word dragged me back to the last family dinner I forced myself to attend. My father had been unusually cheerful, pouring wine like we were normal. My mother kept asking about my savings, my retirement, my future. I thought it was intrusive. Now I heard the question underneath it. How much can we take? Morgan tapped her pen against her desk. "We need a forensic trail. Bank statements, card statements, lender contact logs, and any signature samples you can provide. Do you have your old driver's license copies? Passport scan? Anything that shows your real signature." I opened a drawer and pulled out a battered envelope. Inside were copies of my license renewals and a notarized lease addendum from years ago. Morgan exhaled. "Perfect." Jake's phone buzzed again. He glanced down and went rigid. "Read it," I said. His voice shook. "Mom says, Dad wants me home, now. Says if I don't come, he'll cut me off." Morgan's eyes hardened. "There it is. Control. They're trying to isolate you from each other." Jake looked at me like a kid caught between 2 fires. "If I don't go, he'll what?" I asked, and kept my voice steady on purpose. "Yell? Threaten? Take your car keys?" Jake swallowed. "He'll hit me." The words landed heavy, real. No drama, no courtroom language, just a truth that had been living in our house for years. I reached across the table and took Jake's hand. His palm was cold and damp. "I'm not leaving you in it alone," I said. Jake's eyes widened. "Riley?" "I'm not walking back into that house," I continued, "but I'm not leaving you in it either. Pack a bag. Tonight. When you go back with a plan." Morgan nodded once. "Good. And Riley, morning after, you file a police report for identity theft." Jape jerked. "Wait, you said don't confront them." "We're not confronting, we're documenting. There's a difference. The report establishes a timeline before your next hearing. It forces institutions to cooperate." I stared at the highlighted pages, the addresses, the accounts, the fake LLC. I felt anger, yes, but more than that, clarity, like someone had finally turned the lights on. I opened my calendar and looked at the date of the full hearing. 3 weeks away. 3 weeks for them to destroy evidence. 3 weeks for us to lock it down. Morgan's voice cut through my thoughts. "Riley, your parents think you're a quiet girl with a small job and no power. Let them keep thinking that." I nodded slowly, because the truth was, my quiet wasn't weakness, it was discipline, and discipline was exactly what this war required. My phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number again. "Last warning, drop it." I didn't reply. I simply forwarded it to Morgan, took a screenshot, and saved it in 3 places. Then I looked at Jake and said the first thing that felt like a promise instead of fear. "Tomorrow," I told him, "we start taking our names back." The morning of the hearing, the courthouse felt different. Same cold marble, same echoing halls, same tired vending machines humming in the corner. But this time, I didn't walk in alone, and I didn't walk in blind. Morgan Hewitt sat beside me, a thin leather binder on her lap like a weapon that didn't need to be raised. My attorney, Danielle Price, stood on my other side, mid-30s, sharp eyes, hair in a low bun, the kind of woman who didn't waste energy on intimidation because she was the intimidation. Across the aisle, my parents looked too confident. My father wore a dark suit he probably rented. My mother wore pearls and sorrow. Harris Caldwell smiled when he saw me, like I was still the same quiet file clerk he expected to fold. He leaned toward my father and murmured something. My father's mouth twitched into a satisfied half-smile. Then he looked at Jake. Jake was sitting behind me, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, but he was there. Not in my parents' row, not under my father's thumb. The bruise on his wrist was gone, but the memory of it sat in the way he held his hands, like he still expected pain. The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone rose. The judge took her seat and scanned the courtroom with that same calm, unforgiving focus. "We're here to determine whether Miss Riley Montgomery requires a conservatorship," Judge Holland said. "Counsel, you may proceed." Caldwell stood first. He was smooth, practiced, almost bored. "Your Honor, Miss Montgomery is secretive, volatile, and financially reckless," he began. "Her parents have credible concerns supported by expert opinion, that she is not capable of managing her affairs. They seek only to protect her." Danielle didn't even stand right away. She waited until Caldwell finished, then rose slowly, like she had all day. "Your Honor," she said, "this petition is not about protection. It's about access, and we have evidence that the petitioners have been exploiting Miss Montgomery's identity for financial gain for years." Caldwell's smile flickered, just a hair. Judge Holland's gaze sharpened. "That is a serious allegation." "It is," Danielle agreed, "which is why we filed a police report for identity theft on February 3rd, and we have supporting documentation from the banks involved." My mother gasped softly, hand to her chest, eyes wide like she'd been struck. My father didn't react, not outwardly, but I saw his fingers tighten around his pen until the knuckles turned white. Caldwell recovered fast. "Your Honor, this is a diversion. Miss Montgomery is attempting to intimidate her parents to avoid oversight." Danielle turned a page in her folder. "Then let's not take my word for it. Let's take the court's investigators." She nodded toward the woman seated near the witness box. Linda Park, appointed by the court, stood and took the oath. Judge Holland addressed her. Miss Park, your findings. Linda's voice was steady. I conducted interviews with Miss Montgomery, her employer, and 2 colleagues. I reviewed her medical history as allowed. Miss Montgomery demonstrated clear understanding of her finances, her living situation, and the consequences of her decisions. I found no evidence of incapacity. A murmur moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Miss Park, did Miss Montgomery disclose all assets? Linda glanced at Danielle, then back to the judge. Miss Montgomery disclosed all accounts requested by the court. There was no indication of concealment. My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing, the first crack in his composure. Danielle didn't let the moment breathe. We also have testimony regarding the so-called psychological assessment submitted by the petitioners, she said. The evaluator never met Ms. Montgomery in person. The assessment was based solely on the petitioner's statements. Judge Holland's eyes went hard. Is that accurate? Caldwell opened his mouth, then closed it. The evaluation was preliminary, Your Honor. Preliminary, the judge repeated, flat, yet used to justify stripping someone of rights. My mother's tissue trembled. Then Danielle nodded to Morgan. Morgan stood. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't need to be. Her power was in the calm way she held numbers like facts were physical objects. Your Honor, Morgan said, I am a forensic CPA. I reviewed Ms. Montgomery's credit history, banking records, and lender documentation. There are multiple accounts opened without her authorization, including a business line of credit associated with an LLC that Ms. Montgomery did not form. Caldwell's face tightened. Objection. Speculation. Morgan didn't blink. Not speculation, documentation. Danielle handed the clerk a packet. The clerk passed it to the judge. Morgan continued, voice clear. These accounts were tied to phone numbers and mailing addresses connected to the petitioners. Additionally, we have evidence of threats sent to Ms. Montgomery and her brother to discourage reporting. Judge Holland looked up slowly. Threats? Danielle lifted her phone. We submitted screenshots, including one message that reads, "Stop digging or you'll lose Jake." Jake's breath caught behind me. My father's chair scraped slightly as he shifted. A small sound, but loud in that room. Judge Holland's gaze moved to my parents. Mr. Caldwell tried to speak, but the judge held up a hand. Mr. Montgomery, she said, voice like steel, stand. My father arose, forced calm painted on his face. Judge Holland's next words landed like a door slamming shut. This court does not grant conservatorship to alleged predators. Silence. Not shocked silence, the kind of silence that comes when everyone realizes the story just changed. Then Judge Holland turned to the bailiff. Security, she said. Please remain present. My mother's face went blank. Her tissue dropped into her lap like it had lost its purpose. Caldwell's confidence cracked at last. He looked at the judge, then at my father, like he'd just realized the client he thought was clean wasn't clean at all. Judge Holland leaned forward. I am denying the petition, she said. I am forwarding this matter to the district attorney, and I am issuing a protective order prohibiting any contact with Ms. Montgomery or her brother pending further investigation. My father's mouth opened, maybe to argue, maybe to threaten, but no sound came out. Because for the first time in my life, he didn't have a room that belonged to him. He had a room that belonged to the truth, and the truth had just stepped into the light. The courthouse doors shut behind me with a sound that felt like a lock clicking into place. Not on me, on them. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that burns your lungs and reminds you you're still alive. Jake stood beside me, shoulders still tense, but his eyes weren't darting anymore. He was breathing like a person who'd been underwater too long and finally broke the surface. Danielle Price tucked her folder under her arm. Morgan Hewitt adjusted her coat, already moving in her head to the next step, the next document, the next chain of custody. They didn't celebrate. Professionals rarely do. They just kept the world from collapsing. "What happens now?" Jake asked, voice low. Danielle answered first. "Now the district attorney decides how to proceed. The judge's order forces a referral. That doesn't guarantee charges, but it starts a process with teeth." Morgan nodded. "And now banks take you seriously. A denied petition is one thing. A court record tied to identity theft and threats? That changes how institutions respond." Jake swallowed hard. "What about them?" I didn't need to ask who. I looked across the parking lot. My parents were still inside somewhere, probably arguing with Caldwell, probably trying to rewrite reality in real time. My mother would cry, my father would rage, and both of them would do the same thing they'd always done, reach for control like it was oxygen. But the judge had cut off their air supply. "We follow the steps," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, because steady didn't mean unhurt. It just meant I refused to fall apart where they could see it. That afternoon, we didn't go home. We went to the police station. A fluorescent-lit lobby, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a bored receptionist who didn't look up until Danielle slid the court order across the counter. The paper did what my fear never could. It made people pay attention. A detective took our statements. He asked me to describe the accounts, the addresses, the dates, the threats. Morgan backed up every answer with a document number and a printed exhibit like she'd been born holding evidence. Jake spoke quietly, but he spoke. When the detective asked about the burner messages, Jake's hands shook. I reached across the table and covered his knuckles with mine. "You're safe," I said. "You're not alone." The detective looked at my brother for a long moment, then nodded like he understood something beyond paperwork. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I recognized and hated. Mom. I stared at it until the screen went dark. Then it rang again. Dad. I blocked both. That should have been the end of it, but predators don't stop just because a judge says no. They adapt. On the third day, my supervisor called me into her office. She wasn't smiling. "Riley," she said carefully, "I received a letter claiming you're under investigation for mental instability and fraud. It also alleges you've been mishandling patient records." My stomach dropped. It was a last swing, a desperate one. Danielle had warned me it might come. "They'll try to burn your reputation when they can't reach your bank account," she'd said. I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I opened my bag and handed my supervisor a folder. Inside, the court order, the denial of petition, the referral to the district attorney, and a letter from Danielle stating my legal standing and the nature of the false claims. Morgan had even included a short summary verifying the identity theft investigation. My supervisor read, eyes widening. Then she looked up at me, something like respect settling into her face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "We'll handle this." For the first time, I realized how powerful the truth becomes when it's written down and signed by the right people. A week later, Jake moved into my apartment. Not forever, not as a child hiding behind his sister, as an adult rebuilding his life. He brought one duffel bag and a box of old photos he wasn't ready to throw away, but didn't want in that house anymore. The first night, he sat at my kitchen table and stared at the same spot my papers had been spread across. "I kept thinking I deserved it," he said. "Like, if I was better, Dad wouldn't—" "Stop," I cut in. Gentle but firm. "That's their voice, not yours." Jake's eyes filled and he turned his head like he was ashamed of the tears. I didn't let him hide. "You're going to learn what freedom feels like," I told him, "even if it's unfamiliar at first." Spring crept in slowly. The district attorney's office called to confirm they'd received the referral. Banks began their fraud investigations. One lender sent a letter stating the LLC credit line had been flagged and frozen pending review. Check systems updated. My credit report started to clear, one corrected entry at a time. It wasn't fast, but it was real. And then, one afternoon, a final envelope arrived. Official, heavy, stamped. Danielle met me at her office to open it. Inside was confirmation, a protective order extension, and notice of formal investigation into Clark and Karen Montgomery for financial exploitation and identity theft. I didn't feel joy. I felt quiet, like a room after a storm when the walls are still standing. That night, I sat on my balcony with Jake. The city lights below flickered like distant candles. He held a mug of coffee in both hands, shoulders finally relaxed. "So, what now?" he asked. I watched my own breath fog the air. "Now we live. Not on defense, not waiting for the next hit. We live like our names belong to us." Jake nodded slowly, like he was tasting the idea. And me? I didn't forgive them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I did something far more important. I stopped letting them rewrite my story. If you've ever been the quiet one in a family that confuses silence with weakness, tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories where truth wins in the most unexpected way, like and subscribe to Still Waters Payback.